Hey guys, it's time for more tutorials. My name is Magnet, and we're going to be talking about defeating Immortal all-ins in Zerg versus Protoss today. More specifically, we're going to be talking about ways to kind of understand how to deal with these. They can be really frustrating from a Zerg perspective because it feels like Protoss just has an infinite amount of force fields, and there's not a whole lot you can do against that. We're going to be looking at different variations of how those can get started. But we're going to set out some general ground rules for what you need in order to survive these. And there's also going to be some really cool plays as far as tech counters, more specifically things like Hydralisks, things like Zergling speed, and also getting really good positioning on the army is very, very important. We'll look at all of that as they come up. So let's go ahead and jump into the game, shall we? That's right, phrasing a question like a statement. So we're looking at Tudming. He's fighting Arthur. Arthur is known to be a very cheesy, very aggressive type of Protoss. So if you're fighting somebody that you know can go for stuff like that, then it'll be a little bit easier to predict what they're going to do. But a general rule, if you've taken a look at the gateway attacks, holding those in this matchup, a general rule is really not to go too high in your drone count. Something that a lot of people really make the mistake of. So in this game, Tudming's going to go 2 hatch before pool, which is pretty risky, but at the same time it's still fairly stable against pro-level players, because on the other side, Arthur looks like he's going for Nexus first into Gateway, so that's about as passive as you can get. So finding a build opener that you're comfortable with is very important, but also getting this third base down as soon as possible is really kind of the backbone to these early game openers. So what you need to do as Zerg is you need to figure out what's going on sooner rather than later. And the easiest way to figure out what's going on is to keep an Overlord near their third base and have an Overlord ready to fly into their main to figure out what's coming out of it. And that'll give you all the information you'll ever really need. If you ever see Robo before third Nexus, that's almost always going to be some sort of aggressive Immortal attack. Down in the lower leagues, maybe something weird like a Colossus timing, but the philosophy is still the same. If they're only on 2 bases, then you're going to be on 3, which you really should be. But your drone count is the most important thing to keep your eye on. You really don't want to exceed about 55 to 60 drones. If you're ever going higher than that, then you're spending way too much on drones and not nearly enough on units. And it's a smart idea just to keep making units on that 55 to 60 drone count until they take a third base. If they just 2 base all in you, then you need that unit count to be high enough at all stages of the game because you don't really know when they're going to start moving out. And you need to be prepared for stuff like that. Like I've talked about a lot in the past as well, you need one of 2 things in order to hold off against things like this. You either need Zergling speed, or you need an earlier Roach Warren at about 7:30 to 8 minutes or so. So we see a double gas taken right now here from Tudming. We're not really sure where that could go quite yet, but also on the other side we're seeing Arthur going for a Robo before third Nexus. And the faster Tudming can figure out what's going on, the easier time he's going to have as far as countering that. So Tudming, now that he has his gases mining, I'm not sure what he's going to opt for. I think it's going to be Zergling speed. And again, you either need Zergling speed. I know he's going to go for a fast lair. So this is another interesting thing that you can do, but you still want to grab Zergling speed with this. What he's doing here, and something that I really like, there's a Zergling speed now. What he's doing here is he's going for a super fast Hydra. This is 3 base Hydra on fairly low amount of drones. You can see his drone count is about 53 right now. He won't want to go too much higher. His next round's going to put him at about 60, and even that is pretty dang high, but it's hitting on the higher ends of where you want to be if you're trying to hold off a 2 base all in. What he's going to do is he's going to go Hydra immediately after this Spire, or immediately after this lair. And Hydras have the range, assuming you get the range upgrade, to fire over the top of the force fields and still hit all the Protoss army. So I love this build so much. I prefer a faster Zergling speed, but I love this build so much as far as stopping any sort of Protoss aggression, because Hydralisk trades well against anything that Protoss can bring out on 2 bases, unless it's something like Colossus, but that moves out really, really late, and you should have a really good idea of what's coming and be able to switch out into something like Roaches to support it as well, or maybe something like Viper, or rather not Vipers, Corruptors to support your army. 2 base Colossus has really not been a thing for a long time, but if you go up against that, and if you're going for this Hydra type of style, you need to start to switch into Roach, probably more around 10 minutes or so if something hasn't come. Most good Immortal all-in builds will start to hit at about 9:30 or so, maybe a little bit earlier if you're playing a super high-level player, or if they're just doing something really aggressive. So that's when you're going to want to plan around to have units out, You can see the Hydralisk Den will finish about then, Zergling speed will finish before then, and he's still just sticking on this low amount of drones right now. He's only on 59 drones. He's also adding spine crawlers here just because he isn't quite sure what's coming, but he knows the Protoss is still only on 2 bases because he has a Zergling there and a Zergling here just waiting to see when a third is taken. So an easy way to protect against this, here's Hydra range by the way, something that you always want to get before speed. An interesting way to protect against this, and kind of just a general rule, is that Protoss is still on 2 bases. There's not much of a reason to exceed about 60 drones, and getting on something like Hydraling or maybe a lot of Roach-Ling is going to be really good at holding these attacks. So Tudming is, or rather Arthur is coming down here getting set up. Notice that he has plenty of vision of where this is coming from. He's seen a lot of this come out already. And if you can ever get a full surround on their army, say you have Zerglings over here, and the rest of your army, say Hydras and maybe some Zerglings over here, and if you can get a full surround and come from all sides, that makes it really terrible for the Protoss, and it makes them have to expend a lot of force fields that probably won't do anything. Even if not, the Hydraling is going to trade really well regardless of the type of positioning that you get, unless it's truly awful. So as long as you get a decent spread here, notice he's moving his spines into position, so spines can be a nice good counter against something like this. But the Hydraling is really all he's creating so far, and at any point he needs to make the Protoss burn force fields. So he makes them burn force fields. Once those force fields are down, you want to run away and try to re-engage or wait for more units to rally up. So getting too hasty against stuff like this is one way you can get yourself killed. As long as you just wait, or assuming you have enough units here and you're confident enough to surround. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is getting a surround from the other side. He has to spend a lot of force fields, and if he messes up at all, which he kind of is a little bit, then he's going to have a lot of trouble holding this. Hydras, even though they're behind the force fields, most of them can still fire. So that's why getting the Hydra range and opening up with early Hydras is really strong as far as holding off Immortal all-ins like this. So this push is getting crushed. Once they're low on sentries is when you can start being super aggressive. And of course, this needs to be stated, but keeping up on your injects is by far the most important component of this. Notice that Tudming has like no money throughout this entire thing, and that's exactly where you want to be. You want to be on full-on unit production mode, and you want to be able to hit your injects. So like we talked about way back in the mechanics video, if you're fighting, you can quickly switch back and inject really fast here, and then jump back to the battle so that you can get everything going on. That really needs to be said. If you're dying with a lot of money in the bank, then that's purely your fault for not keeping up on your injects. But now that this push is decomposed, there's only Immortals left, and Immortals against Hydras are really, really bad. And this is basically game over. There's really no way Protoss can recover from this. Tudming could even just attack at Arthur's base and be in great shape, or he could just add on drones and continue to tech up to whatever he wants to. Maybe like Mutalisks are really good against these type of plays, or Swarm Hosts. So that's going to be it for the first replay. Let's jump into another one. Once this thing loads anyway. Hey, I have to wait for it to load. This is going to be Mini Razor versus San, and this is going to be a different way to hold this. This is going to be mostly about positioning, and mostly about really heavy Roach-Ling commitments. So still, Mini Razor is going to stay on the right philosophy. He's not going to over-drone. He's going to play it safe, and he's just going to produce a lot of stuff so that he has enough stuff to be ready by the time that San gets there. Honestly, most of the time that you see Zergs die to builds like this is either going to be because they chose to engage in a poor position, they didn't get enough surface area or a good enough surround. Secondly, it could be that the Protoss just controls absolutely unbelievably, and they should deserve the win if they control absolutely perfectly in that type of situation, because that's super hard to do. And thirdly is just if the Zerg messes up and just doesn't have enough stuff on the field. Those are going to be the three primary reasons why this will work at the pro level. But at low levels, it will be primarily because the Zerg just doesn't have enough stuff. So as long as the Protoss is on 2 bases, you really need to stick to that low drone count and just make stuff. And like we've talked about a lot in the gateway videos, or rather holding gateway attacks, you need to either have roaches or Zergling speed on the field by a decent time. 7:30 to 8 minutes is about when you want to aim for that. And obviously the earlier the better. At least being able to produce those units is going to be the best case scenario. So here's the Robo before third base coming up once again. So if Mini Razor were to know exactly about that, he'd know exactly what's going on. Up comes a Warp Prism first, and you might have to deal with annoying little Warp Prism plays before that timing comes up. Lairs coming up as well, and the Roach Warren is going to be what he chooses rather than Zergling speed, which is okay. I would prefer the Zergling speed in the Hydra play, but that has its own sensitivities. Against Immortal all-ins specifically, Hydras are way better than Roaches, but still, Roaches can work. He's getting the Lair so he can get Roach speed, and Roach speed is very, very important as far as holding stuff like this so you can get the right positioning. This is annoying stuff might have to deal with as well. So this is why having Overlord spread, just to protect against little Warp Prism plays like this, can be important. Because if they were able to get a force field on your ramp and you didn't have enough units back up here, then you could be in a lot of trouble. Let's also note that Mini Razor's drones are about 55. That's when he's starting mass unit production. But if he gets locked out of his main base here, that's going to be some trouble. Fortunately, he has some Roaches hatching and some Zerglings that are already on the field. And he can start to rally up maybe this Queen or something. He has another Queen in his main. He should be okay. But this can be one way that Immortal All-Ins can be getting out of control. And that's mostly because you're just not dealing with this initial attack correctly. The Roaches start to rally forward here, though. And they'll be able to push this off pretty much no problem. See him trying to pick up that last Zealot, but I don't know what he's doing there. He probably just misclicked. So still, mass unit production. There's really no reason to produce drones right now. He's in that magic number range of 55 to 60 worth of drones. You don't want to overproduce too much, and he's just producing nothing but units until the Protoss takes their third base. So that's all you really want to do, and wait for that attack to come, and then figure out how to decompose it once it does come. Of course, if you had the opportunity to scout, you would see there's nothing but Immortals and Sentries moving across the map, so you'd know exactly what's going on. And Mini Razor, since he was remaining diligent with his injects, he's remaining diligent as far as making units. He has a lot of stuff on the field here, and with Roach-Ling especially, this is going to be all about getting at an engagement angle that does not favor the Protoss. So you want as much of a surround as possible. So what we're going to see in this game, San's going to kind of walk up here, and Mini Razor's going to have an arc that's like here, 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 and even as far back as here. And if you have that much of a surround, they have to waste so many force fields, and most of the time they will just mess that up and die. So we're seeing San continue to build up here. Same thing with Mini Razor. He knows the attack is coming. He's just producing nothing but units. Notice how he's walking all these units down completely around to the other side so he can surround from the back as well as the front. And San has to control this perfectly or he's dead. So we're seeing Mini Razor kind of engaging just a little bit, trying to make him waste force fields. And look at the huge arc right now. Mini Razor has almost 180-degree arc right now. And it's going to just go even more out of control. San didn't force field perfectly. And now Mini Razor is just all up in his business. Sentries are dying left and right. And once the Sentry energy runs out is when you're going to start reinforcing with Zerglings, hopefully. The Zerglings are going to do really well against just naked Immortals and Stalkers. And it's still just full surrounds here on the army is what Mini Razor is going for once again. He is pulling his drones off of here because you can't ever really be too careful. And if you lose a handful of drones and hold it off, then you're in a better position than if you didn't pull drones and you died to it. So San's losing Immortals here as he does have another one drop. But even still, it looks like San's still in a decent position now. But notice that there's no sentries. There's only 2 Immortals left, whereas he started the push with 3. Now it's really just basically gateway units versus Roach Zergling. As long as you get decent surrounds and as long as you stay diligent with your unit production, you should eventually hold this off unless you really make a mistake. So now that the units are starting to get a little bit out of control, if there's only Immortals left, you really want to focus those down since they're the most important component of this. So you can see these red Immortals right now. And if you're able to ever get those Immortals down, and you have just Roach Zergling on the field against a pretty vanilla gateway army, you should have a pretty easy time dealing with that. So notice that Mini Razor, once again, he's fanning out as much as he can, so that the Roaches will hopefully take this attack path and this attack path and give him a decent engagement angle of about, 90 degrees, maybe a little bit more. And if you can get those type of engagements, especially with no sentries, then every one of your units will be firing and all of his will be firing, but you have more damage output just because you have more stuff. So attacking up here once again, we're seeing basically the same type of thing. Mini Razor not overcommitting once again, as you don't really want to commit until you're confident you have an advantage. It's really just about buying enough time to get enough stuff on the field. You can see there was 11 more Roaches on the field, but once he gets those put together and he can attack, he'll be in good shape. Still just trying to set up the surround here. As you can see him coming. Look how far he purposefully fans this. He just had all of his Roaches on move command all the way across this area just to get a better surround, and that's exactly what you want to do. Notice he's at about 180 degrees surround right now, which means that there's not nearly enough force fields in the world, and little packs of Roaches can pick off Immortals and all of a sudden decompose this push really fast. So San trying to get the Warp Prism. The Queen did kill the Warp Prism there, so really clutch play there from the Queen. But now that he's on top of this army, there's just Stalkers left, and Stalkers versus Roaches in this amount of number, it's always going to favor you. And yeah, that's just eventually going to end the game because you just have way too much stuff. So again, the drone count fell down to 43 because you had to pull drones earlier to deal with that. There may be an issue you might have to consider yourself, but just because he had enough stuff and he made the right decision, was able to surround. He held that easy peasy. Finally, we're going to take a look at one more Immortal all-in. This is going to be a little bit of a different flavor. It's going to hit faster, and it's not going to have sentries in it. You'll see this every once in a while, and it can be really irritating if you don't prepare for it properly. These types of builds could actually just end the game. And we've seen them end games before at the pro level, but these builds are pretty rare for a reason. That's because they really shouldn't work if the Zerg does what they're supposed to. So it's going to be HoTS versus Snoot. And this is why staying on top of what you're supposed to be doing in the early game is really important, as far as getting Zergling speed or a Roach Warren by the right time, because these attacks with no sentries hit a lot faster. A lot of times they'll only be on one gas, and that means they won't be spending a lot of time mining gas. They won't have as many probes, and they'll move out about a minute or a minute and a half earlier than the other ones will. So that's why you need to really be on top of either getting Zergling speed or getting Roaches out as soon as possible. Note that Snoot's third is actually a lot later than the other two games that we saw, but it is coming out now, so there we go, plop. 4 minutes is a good timing to try and get your third base down. It really shouldn't be any later than that, unless you're facing like a one-base Protoss, which is super rare, but you might get into those situations yourself. We talked about all that in the scouting videos before, so that should be, and also in the cheese video, so go back and watch those if you need to figure that stuff out, but that should be established as common knowledge by now. So here we go. Here comes the Warp Prism first. He is on 2 gases, but he's like barely mining any, so this is a pretty big tell if you can see their gases, but honestly I wouldn't worry too much about that. I would worry more about dissecting the fact that he's only on 2 bases, and if you can see the robo, that's a huge tell. But if he's only on 2 bases, then you should really be sticking at that sort of moderate drone count. He's at 42 right now, and he's getting his Roach Warren up in time, he's getting his lair done, and he didn't go for Zergling speed, he opted for he did go for Zergling speed. So he has Zergling speed and Roaches, which is one of the better ways to hold off really, really early pushes. Look how fast this is starting to move out already. This is about a minute earlier than the other ones that we saw. And this is just going to be a Warp Prism, Immortals, and a lot of Zealots. And the way you hold this is just with a lot of stuff. There's no fancy control or micro or anything. It's just getting a lot of stuff and getting it on top of the Protoss army as soon as possible. And again, it's about knowing when to stop drones. He's only at 42 right now. He could have gotten a lot more if he had a faster third base, or maybe if he didn't produce those Zerglings that ran up here and did stuff. But still, 42 is enough against this type of push, because if he moves out that early, he's not going to have as many workers as you will. So really just staying diligent and staying willing to produce units rather than drones, assuming they're still on 2 bases, can really crush things like this. So we're starting to see this move out here. And again, just getting a bunch of stuff on top of him is going to be the most important thing. So trying to get a full surround with your Zerglings on top of the Immortals especially is going to be important. And the Roaches can deal with the Zealots, and if you can decompose this down to only Zealots, if the Immortals are dead, then killing those Zealots with Roaches is super easy. So this can get out of control if you're not expecting it and if you're not reacting properly, so it's really on you to make sure you are doing those things. And notice that this does have +1, so what Snoot is trying to do right now, he's trying to kill as many Zealots as possible with his Roaches while keeping them out of range of the Immortals. So if you can pick off the Zealots with your Roaches and then use the Zerglings to surround Immortals and Stalkers and stuff like that, that's how you're going to want to really control these fights. So maybe you can select all of your Zerglings and just run them right past the Zealots and go attack back here. Then the Roaches will be hitting Zealots, and then the Zerglings will be hitting everything else. So it's a good way, and you can see that's exactly what he's trying to do, trying to get back there as soon as possible and get on top of this, while the Roaches, Queens, and everything else are hitting the Zealots. A lot of fancy Warp Prism micro here, and HoTS is doing okay, but eventually once the Zealots start to wear down, especially if you got an Immortal earlier on, these pushes are really going to fall apart from the Protoss. And as long as you're keeping up on your injects and keeping up on making units, you really shouldn't have too much trouble. And from that point, again, you can just play into a longer game, or you can just go get back in his face and punish him for losing his entire army and not doing anything to you. So, Spinecrawler coming forward, Immortal's at like no health, and down go the Zerglings. Notice how the Zerglings are just walking right forward and getting on top of the Stalkers. But yeah, he's just decomposing this push fairly easily, mostly just because he's able to control properly and he stayed on the right amount of drones. Which, like I said, 55 is about as high as you should go. He's only on 42. But something that I kind of skipped over is he produced a lot of Zerglings earlier in the game just to try to cancel a third base, which you don't have to produce those if you don't want to. It just happened to work out for him that way. If he didn't produce those, he could probably easily be on like 50 drones and still have enough units to hold this off just fine. So once he's pushed it back, you can continue to play a later game. honestly, after you hold off an Immortal all-in, one of the best transitions is just to throw down a Spire and drone up as hard as you can. And then the Spires will create, or the Spire will allow you to make Mutalisks, and you can start to just wreck that way. You should also be aware that these Immortal all-ins aren't typically just one stage. They can just be multiple staged. So you need to stay on top of whether they're trying to take a third, or if they're making more Immortals. At that point, you should easily have your lair done, so you can transform that Overlord into an Overseer and fly in there and figure out what's going on. But Spire is one of the best transitions against stuff like this. But if not, if you're not feeling confident with Spire, Hydralisks are really good until Colossus come out. Or you can just take a 4th base and kind of just play out the game more normally, accepting an economic advantage and a unit composition advantage. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I hope it gave you some good pointers as far as holding off Immortal all-ins. So now, when you see that next time, assuming you do everything you're supposed to, you should just walk all over it, and you'll be able to type LOL in chat while they die, if you want to really be BM. But so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any questions you have down in the comments. There are more Zerg tutorials in the description if you want to check that out. But until then, I will see you guys later.